The feedback from last week's critique ended up pointing me in a different direction than what I'd originally imagined. The idea of creating a narrative for a found object was intriguing, but I found myself second-guessing how to go about starting this process. How do I document an object I can identify? As a way to procrastinate, I started to look at the research that Martin had suggested, 2 books titled Evidence and Rich and Strange. Both are photography books, one crafted solely from a single found image, the other a collection of found photographs. In reading Evidence, the first point that struck me was the difference in context. Today, we're accustomed to seeing images stripped of all identifying or instructional text. But when Evidence was first published, this way of presenting was a new phenomenon. Photography wasn't yet considered an art form. This method of working resonated. It's something I've done frequently this semester. Reading about Rich and Strange struck me in a different way. A book crafted entirely from a single found photograph. I have around 24 plates to work with and from, but the idea of a single reminded me of a small medical slide that I'd stumbled across at Pick and Pull a couple months ago. It was buried under the backseat of a car, and the fact that it was a slide was pretty telling of its age. There were a few of them, but most were covered in a mysterious goo, and this one was clean, so I grabbed it. When held up to the light, it was gross but fascinating. An organ, a baby, I couldn't tell. There was something scrawled on the back side of the slide, PLAC, which could have meant placenta. Again, I wasn't sure. I tucked it in my wallet and have been carrying it around ever since. Honestly, I tried to go back and focus solely on the plates, but the idea of this strange slide kept coming back to mind. After all, it too was an object that I couldn't identify. I started with a very obvious way of documenting: photographs. I chose one plate at random. I looked at the front image. I looked at the wood blocks that backed it. I looked at the ink that stained the sides. I looked at the writing scrawled on the back. I looked at the numbers written on the sides. Then I did the same for the slide, which I feel compelled to warn you, what you're about to see is graphic content. This slide is particularly compelling to me because of the circumstances in which I found it. Again, my entire fascination with Pick and Pull is because I feel it's a place for the broken, leftover, and forgotten. You can often see glimpses of people's lives through what they leave behind. Here's this incredibly private, vulnerable slide, lost and forgotten, but found in a very public space. Unfortunately, I don't have much else from that day. I do remember that I just rented a new camera with a macro lens, and I took that with me. Here are a few images of the car that it was found in. So now what? I wondered that too. I can't go back. This trip was in July and the car has since been removed. But I do seem to have a collection of items here. My gut reaction was to combine them, so I did. In the most obvious way, I replaced the slide. These are just quick mock-ups. Initially, I went this route because it was easy, a square into a square. But as soon as I did, I recognized the shift in context that had occurred. This linked back to some of the thinking I had read about in Evidence, stripping an object or scene of all identifying and instructional context. But my actions here went one step further and offered these objects in a new context. Suddenly, if only on my computer screen and in my mind, these car parts became important because they were on slide film. And if they were on slide film, they were meant to be viewed in a large format and by many people. This made me wonder how much of my original curiosity about the slide was because of its format. It was an antiquated object, no longer of use because of the advent of digital technology, much like the car it was found in. A number of questions have now come up for me. Honestly, the first one is, does anyone else find this interesting? I'm fascinated by these mashups because they present a narrative of focus, like we're looking at the unseen, but I'm not sure if I'm alone in this. Are there objects or aspects of what I've presented here that stick out to others, elements that I've overlooked? Thank you in advance.